shone out of the silver candlesticks. The Passover wine greeted us from out the sparkling bottles. Ah, how pure, how simple the Passover cakes looked, peeping innocently from under their beautiful cover. How sweetly the horseradish smiled to me. And how pleasant was the mortar, the mixture of crushed nuts and apples and wine, which symbolized the mortar out of which the Israelites made bricks in Egypt when they were slaves. And even the dish of salt water was good to look upon. Proudly and haughtily stood the throne on which my father, the king of the night, was going to recline. A glory shone forth from my mother's countenance, such as I always saw shining forth from it on such a night. And the queen's daughter, Bassi, was entirely from her head to her heels as if she really belonged to the Song of Songs. No, what am I saying? She was the Song of Songs itself. The only pity was that the king's son was put sitting so far away from the queen's daughter. I remember that they once sat at the Passover ceremony in a different position. They were together, once on a time, years ago. One beside the other they sat. I remember that the king's son asked his father the 4 questions. And I remember that the queen's daughter stole from His Majesty the afikomen, the pieces of the Passover cake he had hidden away to make the special blessing over. And I, what had I done then? How much did we laugh at that time! I remember that once on a time, years ago, when the Seder was ended, the queen had taken off her royal garment of silk, and the king had taken off his white robes, and we two, Bassi and I, sat together in a corner playing with the nuts which my mother had given us. And there, in the corner, I told Bassi a story, one of the fairy tales I had learned at school from my comrade Shaker, who knew everything in the world. It was the story of the beautiful queen's daughter, who had been taken from under the wedding canopy, bewitched, and put into a palace of crystal for 7 years on end, and who was waiting for someone to raise himself up into the air by pronouncing the holy name, flying above the clouds, across the hills and over valleys, over rivers and across deserts, to release her, to set her free. But all this happened once on a time, years ago. Now the queen's daughter is grown up, she is big, and the king's son is grown up, he is big, and we two are seated in such a way, so pitilessly that we cannot even see one another. Imagine it to yourself. On the right of His Majesty sat the king's son, on the left of Her Majesty sat the queen's daughter, and we recited the Haggadah, my father and I, at the top of our voices, as once on a time, years ago, page after page, in the same sing-song as of old. And my mother and Bassi repeated the words after us, softly, page after page, until we came to the Song of Songs. I recited the Song of Songs together with my father, as once on a time, years ago, in the same melody as of old, passage after passage. And my mother and Bassi repeated the words after us softly, passage after passage, until the king of the night tired out after that long Passover ceremony and somewhat dulled by the 4 cups of raisin wine, began to doze off by degrees. He nodded for a few minutes, woke up, and went on singing the Song of Songs. He began in a loud voice, "Many waters cannot quench love," and I caught him up in the same strain, "Neither can floods drown it." The recital grew softer and softer with us both, as the night wore on, until at last His Majesty fell asleep in real earnest. The queen touched him on the sleeve of his white robe. She woke him with a sweet, affectionate gentleness, and told him he should go to bed. In the meantime, Bassi and I got the chance of saying a few words to one another. I got up from my place and went over close beside her, and we stood opposite one another for the first time closely on this night. I pointed out to her how rarely beautiful the night was. On such a night, I said to her, it is good to go walking. She understood me and answered me with a half smile by asking, on such a night? And I imagined that she was laughing at me. That was how she used to laugh at me once on a time, years ago. I was annoyed. I said to her, Bassi, we have something to say to one another. We have much to talk about. Much to talk about? She replied, echoing my words. And again I imagined that she was laughing at me. I put in quickly, perhaps I am mistaken. Maybe I have nothing at all to say to you now. These words were uttered with so much bitterness that Bassi ceased from smiling and her face grew serious. Tomorrow, she said to me, tomorrow we will talk. And my eyes grew bright. Everything about me was bright and good and joyful. Tomorrow, tomorrow we will talk. Tomorrow, tomorrow. I went over nearer to her. I smelt the fragrance of her hair, the fragrance of her clothes, the same familiar fragrance of her. And there came to my mind the words of the Song of Songs. Thy lips, O my spouse, drop as the honeycomb. Honey and milk are under thy tongue, and the smell of thy garments is like the smell of Lebanon. And all our speech this night was the same, without words. We spoke together with our eyes, with our eyes. Bassi, good night, I said to her softly. It was hard for me to go away from her. The one God in heaven knew the truth, how hard it was. Good night, Bassi made answer. She did not stir from the spot. She looked at me deeply perplexed out of her beautiful blue Song of Song eyes. I said good night to her again, and she again said good night to me. My mother came in and led me off to bed. When we were in my room, my mother smoothed out for me with her beautiful snow-white hands the white cover of my bed, and her lips murmured, "Sleep well, my child, sleep well." Into these few words she poured a whole ocean of tender love, the love which had been pent up in her breast the long time I had been away from her. I was ready to fall down before her and kiss her beautiful white hands. "Good night," I murmured softly to her, and I was left alone, all alone on this night. I was all alone on this night, all alone on this silent, soft, warm, early spring night. I opened my window and looked out into the open, at the dark blue night sky, and at the shimmering stars that were like brilliants. And I asked myself, is it then true? Is it then true? Is it then true that I have lost my happiness for ever? Is it then true that with my own hands I took and burnt my wonderful dream palace and let go from me the divine queen's daughter whom I had myself bewitched once on a time, years ago? Is it then so? Is it so? Maybe it is not so. Perhaps I have come in time. I am come into my garden, my sister, my spouse. I sat at the open window for a long time on this night, and I exchanged whispered secrets with the silent, soft, warm, early spring night that was full, strangely full, of secrets and mysteries. On this night I made a discovery, that I loved Bassi with that holy, burning love which is so wonderfully described in our Song of Songs. Big fiery letters seemed to carve themselves out before my eyes. They formed themselves into the words which I had only just recited, my father and I, the words of the song.